Hello and welcome to Joko Yo. It is not at all uncommon for women to die early, more frequently than men, before the advent of modern medicine. Isn't that a way to start? You often run across, when you look at old records, men that had married multiple times, usually because of the death of their wives in childbirth. And 3 and 4 marriages in the old days, that's pretty common. It's also common to see marriages with pretty wide ranges of age, especially the more times men were married. So it was with a guy named William Rand, born around 1703, 1705 in Kent, England. Now, before leaving England in 1735 for the British North American colony of Virginia, he married with the intention of bringing his wife over soon to join him. Well, she died while he was gone, and no one seems to know why. Childbirth could well have been its cause, but so could typhoid fever. I mean, who knows? Scarlet fever, yellow fever, cholera, no idea. What is known is that he married again in 1745. His second wife, Sophia, had been born in Virginia to a cabinet maker, James Allman, which is kind of cool, actually. On a side note, James Allman is related to the Allman Brothers Band, but I'll leave it alone. Anyway, his second wife, Sophia, had been born in Virginia to a cabinet maker, James Allman, and his wife in 1719. Now, she had married an older man herself named Benjamin Forsyth before she married Mr. Rand, and they had a son together named James before Benjamin died, leaving Sophia and James without a husband and father. The young widow, Sophia, took young James to live with her father, where she met our aforementioned William Rand, himself a widower. Okay, told you it's pretty common. They had their first child together, John, in 1750. Now later there would be Catherine, William, Mary, Walter, and Christiana. They sent their sons to England to study law, and the girls, well, they stayed behind because, sexism. It was common also for women to marry multiple times when their husbands died of old age. Again, you frequently see in the old records marriages between middle-aged people, usually, but not always men, and younger people, late teens to mid-20s. Of those children of William and Sophia, well, to use her full name, Sophia Allman Forsyth Rand, more is known about the boys than the girls. Again, sexism. John Rand was smart, and according to the records, full of what some call common sense. And that's not to say that he was well liked, but more on that later. He was business-minded and seemingly of a serious and responsible nature. His brother William, Jr., was more of a frivolous person, loved a good time, which was easier to have when your father left you lots of money and property. See, their father and mother also left behind a good reputation and a good standing for the Rand family. William was a master builder, supervising the construction of several government buildings in Williamsburg, Virginia, which was the capital of Virginia at the time. William and Sophia never left Virginia, but as partial payment for his services to the government, he was also granted some land in the colony to the south, and he never did anything with it, but he held that land in North Carolina all the same. So when I say William and Sophia left their children with a good setup, that's what I mean. Their youngest son, Walter, became a lawyer after serving in the Revolution under General Nathaniel Greene. He only married once, which is actually a bit unusual for this group of people. The middle boy, William Jr., the one that liked to have a good time, took advantage of his family's reputation. He made the most of it. When his older brother John came to North Carolina to live on his father's North Carolina grant land, well, he came too. The size of the Grant area was large enough for the family to be major players in North Carolina, and since this grant will later on constitute the majority or a large part of what will be Wake County, it's really worth talking about these guys. So, from fun-loving William Rand Jr., through no effort of his own, this guy used his connection to be a delegate to the new North Carolina government. He helped write the North Carolina Constitution and was able to secure a marriage into not only one well-respected North Carolina family, but two. Yes, of course, he was married multiple times. Both times to a lady named Elizabeth. I mean, guess it's kind of easy. Remember just one name. First time was to a lady named Elizabeth Atkins, and next to an Elizabeth Stroud. In his spare time, he gambled on cockfights, chicken fights, horse racing, and ran up lots of debts that he couldn't pay, lost numerable lawsuits because of them, and died pretty much penniless in a poorhouse in Stokes County. The more responsible Rand kid, John, left Virginia to claim his father's grant at an early age, coming first to Smithfield, North Carolina, where his father's reputation and land holdings qualified him to help lay out the new town's grids and property lines. When Wake was carved out of Johnston, John became its first attorney and one of the representatives to the North Carolina Provincial Congress during the Revolution, where he worked with and got to know Theophilus Hunter from the previous episode, Joel Lane from a couple of episodes, and of course John Hinton, whose daughter Elizabeth he married at the age of 28. John Rand, by most accounts, was a serious and business-minded man with a lawyer's mind, a builder's creativity, and an entrepreneur's hunger. His contracts and business dealings were typically in his favor, and sometimes contracts were drawn up at the expense of the other person. Maybe that's why John Rand's marriage to Elizabeth Hinton only lasted 3 years. It's not they didn't get along. Rather, it's that John found himself receiving a bullet, courtesy of his neighbor, Thomas Watson. Maybe it was a duel, a disagreement, who knows, but it certainly was not a mistake. Watson intended to kill him and prematurely ended yet another marriage. He must have known something was going to happen, since he wrote his will just prior to his death at the age of 31, in which he left the family farm at the falls of Swift Creek in what is now Garner to his youngest brother Walter. His widow, Elizabeth Hinton Rand, was 20, but wasn't a widow for long, married Thomas James of Duplin shortly thereafter. Thomas was a brother of her sister's husband. What? Elizabeth Hinton Rand, James, was married about 16 years to Thomas before she was widowed again by Thomas's death. 2 husbands dead before she turned 40. 2 of her daughters married brothers, both, of course, named Keenan, and when one of her daughters died, her husband married yet another sister. And then there's Elizabeth's other sisters. Martha Hinton married Joel Lane, then died, but Joel Lane was determined not to leave this family, and Martha's sister was single, so he married Mary, Martha's sister, upon the death of Martha. So if my tally is correct, in one family group, over 3 generations, there were 5 husbands and 5 wives that died prematurely in this short time span, leaving widows and widowers. Now, if you have followed some of these episodes, you'll know that the Rand, Hinton, Lane families were the primary shapers of early North Carolina government and the biggest landowners in the state, richer than nearly everybody else that lived here. You would think that their wealth would insulate them from things like smallpox, scarlet fever, yellow fever, death by childbirth, death by gunshot. You would expect that their wealth would help them have longer lifespans than the poorer people that also lived here, but records show that the poor and wealthy in North Carolina died at roughly the same rate from the same stuff. In North Carolina, wealth did not equal health. You might say something like it was a long time ago, so it's not like today. People didn't live as long. I mean, you can say that there was no such thing as doctors or hospitals here, and you'd be completely wrong. Sure, some methods, like bleeding someone to remove a fever, and beliefs such as every person's health being regulated by 4 liquids, are a bit outdated and wrong, but there were, at the time of the Revolution, vaccines that were being used to a high degree of effectiveness. We even had a guy from Massachusetts living in Smithfield who was doing eye surgery. At the same time as all these relatively wealthy people were dying prematurely in North Carolina, people's lives were being saved in cities like Boston and Philadelphia. To say that they were cities, Boston and Philadelphia, is to really insult real cities that existed then. It's not like you're going to have the same kind of healthcare you're going to find in, say, Paris or London. To put Boston of the late 1700s in the same category as, say, London of the same time is a bit like lumping Benson, North Carolina, with downtown Manhattan of the present day. And those towns had doctors, and medicine, and eye surgery, and vaccines. But there are doctors where there are people. I can't say that access to a doctor would have saved all their lives, but it couldn't have hurt. I'm sure any of them, seeing their loved ones dying, would have been very happy to have been able to get some medical treatment for their loved ones, and none of their wealth could save them. It didn't. But access, just access to medical care at the time, maybe it could have helped. Access to trained medical triage experience, and especially vaccines, were things that people far less wealthy than the Hittons, Rands, and Lanes had access to in those cities. The poor people didn't benefit from wealth, they benefited from access to educated medical care in those cities. There were loads of people, rich and poor, that lived into their 80s and later during the colonial period. Everyone didn't die in their 50s. But fewer of them lived in remote areas that lacked access to medical professionals. I'm sure these families would have thought it absolutely insane that people with today's access to medical care that they couldn't even dream about would not trust it and instead rely on rumors and advice from their untrained friends and treatments resembling witch doctor recipes. All the wealth in the world can't save your life if the treatment is not accessible, then or now. But if it is available, and you choose not to take it, well, there's no treatment for stupidity. And thanks for listening. Until next time, y'all be good.